Hello and welcome to another day of English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Abear. As a reminder, we are working on a literary analysis unit, and this is from a larger unit from Common Lit called Coming of Age. At the end of this unit, we will be writing an essay, but before that, we need to be reminded of our essential question. What experiences lead us from childhood into adulthood? And again, at the end, we will be writing an essay where you're going to explain your perspective on what it means to come of age and how we become an adult. You're going to use evidence from multiple texts and your own experiences to support your argument. And as a reminder, the best way for you to get that evidence and to have it ready is to be marking your text with all of those signposts and answering those questions in the margins. That is going to give you the best evidence and the easiest way to grab that evidence when we begin planning our essay, which is coming really, really soon. So yesterday we began reading Marigolds. I read the first part, and then you were to read the next section with a partner. Today we're going to continue reading. We have several pieces of this short story that I will be reading out loud to you. And that's the easiest way, guys, for you to make sure that you're marking that text, because if you're not having to read it out loud yourself, then you're able to mark that text. So I want you to have your pencils and highlighters in your hand ready to mark that text up as we continue reading. So we're going to continue at paragraph 17. Okay, so if you'll grab your handout and follow along with me as I read. When Miss Lottie's house came into view, we stopped, ostensibly to plan our strategy, but actually to reinforce our courage. Miss Lottie's house was the most ramshackle of all our ramshackle homes. The sun and rain had long since faded its rickety frame siding from white to a sullen gray. The boards themselves seemed to remain upright, not from being nailed together, but rather from leaning together, like a house that a child might have constructed from cards. A brisk wind might have blown it down, and the fact that it was still standing implied a kind of enchantment that was stronger than the elements. There it stood, as far as I know, is standing yet, a gray, rotting thing with no porch, no shutters, no steps, set on a cramped lot with no grass, not even any weeds, a monument to decay. So I want you to pause for a second. We just finished paragraph 17, and I want you to go back to paragraph 17 and underline 3 pieces of evidence that detail why the children thought of Miss Lottie's house as a monument to decay. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to go and highlight those details. All right, let's continue reading in paragraph 18. In front of the house, in a squeaky rocking chair, sat Miss Lottie's son, John Burke, completing the impression of decay. John Burke was what was known as queer-headed. Black and ageless, he sat rocking day in and day out in a mindless stupor, lulled by the monumentous squeak-squawk of the chair. A battered hat atop his shaggy head shaded him from the sun. Usually, John Burke was totally unaware of everything outside his quiet dream world. But if you disturbed him, if you intruded upon his fantasies, he would become enraged, strike out at you, and curse at you in some strange, enchanted language which only he could understand. We children made a game of thinking of ways to disturb John Burke and then to elude his violent retribution. But our real fun, our real fear, lay in Miss Lottie herself. Miss Lottie seemed to be at least 100 years old. Her big frame still held traces of the tall, powerful woman she must have been in youth, although it was now bent and drawn. Her smooth skin was dark reddish brown, and her face had Indian-like features and the stern stoicism that one associates with Indian faces. Miss Lottie didn't like intruders either, especially children. She never left her yard, and nobody ever visited her. We never knew how she managed those necessities which depended on human interaction. How she ate, for example, or even whether she ate. When we were tiny children, we thought Miss Lottie was a witch, and we made up tales that we half believed ourselves about her exploits. We were far too sophisticated now, of course, to believe the witch nonsense. But old fears have a way of clinging like cobwebs, and so when we sighted the tumble-down shack, we had to stop to reinforce our nerves. "Look, there she is," I whispered, forgetting that Miss Lottie could not possibly have heard me from that distance. "She's fooling with them crazy flowers." "Yeah, look at her." Miss Lottie's marigolds were perhaps the strangest part of the picture. Certainly they did not fit in with the crumbling decay of the rest of her yard. Beyond the dusty brown yard in front of the sorry gray house rose suddenly and shockingly a dazzling strip of bright blossoms, clumped together in enormous mounds, warm and passionate and sun-golden. The old black witch woman worked on them all summer, every summer, down on her creaky knees, weeding and cultivating and arranging, while the house crumbled and John Burke rocked. For some perverse reason, we children hated those marigolds. They interfered with the perfect ugliness of the place. They were too beautiful. They said too much that we could not understand. They did not make sense. There was something in the vigor with which the old woman destroyed the weeds that intimidated us. It should have been a comical sight. The old woman with the man's hat on her cropped white head, leaning over the bright mounds, her big backside in the air. But it wasn't comical. It was something we could not name. We had to annoy her by wheezing a pebble into her flowers and by yelling a dirty word, then dancing away from her rage, reveling in our youth and mocking her age. Actually, I think it was the flowers we wanted to destroy, but nobody had the nerve to try it, not even Joey, who was usually fool enough to try anything. All right, I'm going to pause here. According to the narrator, why did the children hate the marigolds? So I want you to jot down your answer to that in the margins, and then we'll come back and finish this section in just a second. "Y'all get some stones," commanded Joey now, and was met with instant giggling obedience as everyone except me began to gather pebbles from the dusty ground. "Come on, Lisbeth." I just stood there, peering through the bushes, torn between wanting to join the fun and feeling that it was all a bit silly. "You scared, Lisbeth?" I cursed and spat on the ground, my favorite gesture of phony bravado. "Y'all children get the stones. I'll show you how to use them." I said before that we were children were not consciously aware of how thick were the bars of our cage. I wonder now, though, whether we were not more aware of it than I thought. Perhaps we had some dim notion of what we were and how little chance we had of being anything else. Otherwise, why would we have been so preoccupied with destruction? Anyway, the pebbles were collected quickly, and everybody looked at me to begin the fun. "Come on, y'all." All right, that is the end of the section that I'm going to be reading out loud to you. I want you to take a minute. There's some questions in the margins for paragraph 27. I want you to jot your answers to those questions in the margins. When you finish answering those questions, then you are going to do some independent reading. So you're going to read paragraphs 29 through 61 independently. While you read, make sure you're doing two things. Make sure that you are answering the questions in the margins. Also remember to not forget your signposts. So after the independent reading, we'll come back and do another whole class reading. So I'm going to give you some time to pause where we are now, your teacher can, for you to finish your independent reading. All right? All right, let's come back together as a whole class. We should be, let's see, on page 8 That's paragraph 62. And so if you will follow along with me, I'll finish this up for us. Miss Lottie, I scrambled to my feet and just stood there and stared at her. And that was the moment when childhood faded and womanhood began. That violent, crazy act was the last act of childhood. For as I gazed at the immobile face with the sad, weary eyes, I gazed upon a kind of reality which is hidden to childhood. The witch was no longer a witch, but only a broken old woman who had dared to create beauty in the midst of ugliness and sterility. She had been born in squalor and had lived in it her whole life. Now, at the end of that life, she had nothing except a falling down hut, a wrecked body, and John Burke, the mindless son of her passion. Whatever verve there was left in her, whatever was of love and beauty and joy that had not been squeezed out by life, had been there in the Marigolds she had so tenderly cared for. Of course, I could not express these things as I knew about Miss Lottie as I stood there awkward and ashamed. The years have put words to the things I knew in that moment as I look back upon it. I know that that moment marked the end of innocence. Innocence involves an unseeing acceptance of things at face value, an ignorance of the area below the surface. In that humiliating moment, I looked beyond myself and into the depths of another person. This was the beginning of compassion, and one cannot have both compassion and innocence. The years have taken me worlds away from that time and that place, from the dust and squalor of our lives, and from the bright thing that I destroyed in a blind, childish striking out God knows what. Miss Lottie died long ago, and many years have passed since I last saw her hut, completely barren at last. For despite my wild contrition, she never planted marigolds again. Yet there are times when the image of those passionate yellow mounds returns with painful poignancy, for one does not have to be ignorant and poor to find that his life is as barren as the dusty yards of our town. And I, too, have planted marigolds. All right, guys, that's the end of this passage, and it's pretty somber, I'm sure you can see. But I want you to go back and answer the questions in the margins about paragraph 62 through 64. And when you do, we're going to come back, and I'm going to give you your instructions for where we're headed next. Independent practice. I want you guys, now that you have finished answering those questions in the margins, just like with all of our common lit passages, there's always questions at the end. And these questions are going to help prepare you for that map assessment that will come in the spring. And so after you answer those questions, if you have time left, then I do want you to go back through and mark this text up, making sure that you're thinking about that essential question as well as the essay question that you're going to be writing really soon. So until next time, happy reading.